Imagine a world where absolute control meets wild unpredictability, a realm where a single challenge can shatter the illusion of perfection. In the heart of Manhattan, one daring bet forces a powerful heiress to question everything she's built. If you love stories that defy convention and stir deep emotions, hit subscribe and join us on this thrilling journey. In the dazzling world of Manhattan high society, Isabella Wright reigns supreme. Known for her impeccable taste, razor-sharp intellect, and the unwavering control she exercised over every facet of her life, Isabella was the embodiment of success. Her multi-million-dollar empire, built over years of relentless ambition and shrewd business acumen, stood as a fortress of wealth and influence. The glittering skyline and the endless stream of exclusive galas were the backdrop to a life so meticulously orchestrated that every moment seemed predestined. Yet, beneath the refined veneer lay a restless spark, a hunger for challenge that even she could no longer ignore. One crisp autumn evening, at an exclusive charity gala held in a historic mansion overlooking Central Park, Isabella's orderly existence was abruptly disrupted. Amid the soft murmur of influential conversation and the gentle clinking of champagne glasses, her brother Alexander, a man known as much for his mischievous provocations as for his sharp wit, emerged from the crowd. With a sly smile and eyes that danced with mischief, he proposed an audacious wager. For 6 months, Isabella was to step outside the predictable corridors of her life and marry a man whose world was utterly alien to hers. The terms were as dramatic as they were clear. If she could thrive in this unpredictable new life, she would secure full control over the family empire. If she failed, she would have to admit that the ironclad control she long boasted was nothing more than an illusion. The ballroom fell silent for a heartbeat as every guest turned to gauge her reaction. In that charged moment, something stirred within Isabella. The idea of forsaking her polished routine for an experience drenched in raw unpredictability sparked a dangerous thrill, a challenge that promised not just a test of her resilience, but a profound exploration of her very identity. With a calm yet determined gaze and a subtle, confident nod, she accepted. That night, as she retreated to her penthouse, the city's neon lights seemed to whisper promises of transformation. The bet was no longer merely about power or control. It was an invitation to break free from the confines of her meticulously controlled existence and discover a more authentic self hidden beneath layers of wealth and precision. Isabella's mind buzzed with both anticipation and trepidation as she contemplated the journey ahead. She knew that the man she would choose had to be as different from her world as night is from day, a living embodiment of unpredictability. And so, with the echo of Alexander's challenge still ringing in her ears, she prepared herself to embark on an odyssey that would test every assumption she had about life, control, and what it truly meant to be free. The morning after the gala, Manhattan awoke to a day filled with possibilities that mirrored Isabella's inner turmoil. Determined to prove her adaptability and to confront the challenge head-on, she set out to find a partner whose life would stand in stark opposition to the cultivated elegance of her own. In her elegantly appointed penthouse, with its minimalist decor, panoramic views of the city, and an air of refined precision, Isabella summoned her most trusted assistant, Sophia. Over meticulously brewed coffee, she issued a singular, uncompromising directive: compile a list of men whose lives were the polar opposite of high society's glitz and glamour. Sophia embraced the challenge with enthusiasm. Within hours, she returned with a diverse list that spanned Manhattan's underbelly, a roster featuring cab drivers navigating chaotic urban streets, struggling artists whose canvases told stories of grit and passion, and rugged mechanics whose calloused hands bore testament to a life of honest labor. Yet, as Isabella scanned the names and brief profiles, none seemed to ignite the spark of genuine challenge. They appeared too readily seduced by the prospect of financial comfort, too willing to succumb to the allure of a wealthy patron. Then her eyes landed on one name: James Carter. Unlike the others, James's life was painted in bold, uncompromising strokes. A broad-shouldered, rugged mechanic with grease-stained hands and a resolute spirit, James had built his modest auto repair shop on the outskirts of Manhattan. More striking, however, was his commitment beyond mere survival. In his scarce spare time, he volunteered at a local homeless shelter, a place where compassion, not capital, was the guiding force. His life was an ode to authenticity, marked by simple values, hard-earned self-reliance, and a quiet defiance of the trappings of wealth. For Isabella, James represented the perfect antithesis to her world. His unadorned existence, free from the trappings of luxury and pretension, promised a challenge that was as invigorating as it was unpredictable. Here was a man who thrived on simplicity and genuine human connection, a stark contrast to the calculated elegance of her high society circles. In him, Isabella saw not only a formidable opponent for the bet, but also an opportunity to confront and, perhaps, transform her own rigid identity. That very morning, as sunlight streamed through the towering windows of her penthouse, Isabella's resolve solidified. James Carter would be the one to pull her from the predictable confines of her life and thrust her into a world where vulnerability reigned supreme. It wasn't merely a wager on power, it was a journey into uncharted emotional territory, one that promised to force her to reassess everything she had ever known about control, authenticity, and the true essence of connection. The stage was set when Isabella arranged to meet James Carter at his modest auto repair shop, a far cry from the opulent environment she was accustomed to. Stepping into his world was like entering an entirely different universe. The garage was a cacophony of clanging tools, the air rich with the smell of motor oil and grease, and walls adorned with faded posters of classic cars that spoke of simpler times. Amid this seemingly chaotic environment, James moved with a confident grace that bespoke years of hard work and unpretentious living. James looked up from a stubborn engine as Isabella entered. His broad shoulders and calloused hands were evidence of a life defined by honest labor, and his piercing gaze assessed her with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. "What does a billionaire heiress want with a guy who fixes engines and changes brake pads?" he asked bluntly, his tone equal parts bemusement and challenge. Unperturbed, Isabella met his gaze steadily and began outlining the terms of the wager. In a clear, measured voice, she explained that their arrangement would be a 6-month marriage, a deliberate experiment with no expectations of romantic sentiment, but rather a test of their ability to navigate worlds that were as different as oil and water. In addition to this unconventional proposition, she offered a generous compensation package that would not only secure his comfort but also benefit the charitable work he so passionately pursued at the shelter. For a long moment, silence stretched between them as James digested her proposal. His natural skepticism warred with an inner resolve born of a lifetime of serving others selflessly. While the prospect of a lucrative arrangement might have tempted many, for James it was the challenge that resonated most deeply. "I'm not doing this for your money," he finally replied in a low, steady tone. "I'm doing it because it's a challenge, a chance to prove that I can hold fast to my values while venturing into a world I've never known." In that moment, the terms of their alliance were set in stone. Both stood on the brink of an adventure that promised to disrupt their carefully ordered lives. For Isabella, it was an exhilarating leap into the realm of the unknown, a test of her ability to adapt and grow beyond the confines of control. For James, it was an opportunity to prove that his world, defined by authenticity and heart, could withstand the allure of luxury. With their unspoken agreement sealed by mutual understanding, the wheels of fate began to turn, setting in motion a journey that neither could have foreseen. The night their unusual arrangement formally began was a study in contrasts, a collision of two disparate realities that would test the limits of both Isabella and James. When James arrived at Isabella's penthouse, he was immediately struck by the surreal nature of his new surroundings. The luxurious apartment was a symphony of opulence, gleaming marble floors, intricate crystal chandeliers casting prismatic light across pristine surfaces, and artwork that exuded refined elegance. To James, it felt like stepping onto a different planet, a world where every detail was meticulously curated to reflect an unyielding dedication to perfection. Isabella greeted him at the door with a composed smile that masked the internal maelstrom of her thoughts. "Welcome to my world," she declared, her voice carrying both formality and an underlying challenge. As she led him through expansive corridors lined with designer furnishings and panoramic city views, she laid out the strict rules of their marriage. There would be no room for emotional entanglements or unscripted behavior. Their union was a calculated experiment, a transaction designed to test both their capacities for adaptation and restraint. That evening, Isabella introduced James to a meticulously orchestrated dinner party held in her grand dining hall. Every course was a masterpiece of culinary art, every conversation a carefully practiced dance of wit and decorum. Her guests, powerful figures from finance, art, and media, regarded James with a mix of polite curiosity and thinly veiled condescension. To them, he was an intriguing anomaly in a world that prized pedigree and perfection. For James, each new encounter was a vivid reminder that he was an outsider thrust into a realm governed by rules he neither understood nor cared to follow. Throughout the night, Isabella reiterated the non-negotiable terms of their arrangement: impeccable decorum, unwavering adherence to social protocol, and above all, the rejection of any behavior that might embarrass her. "This isn't a relationship," she stated in measured tones, "it's a transaction." In response, James offered a wry smile and a quiet retort. "Then let's hope I'm worth the investment." As the hours passed, the rigid structure of Isabella's world began to fray at the edges under James's influence. His occasional acts of subtle rebellion, a casual remark here, an unrestrained laugh there, challenged the meticulously maintained order. With every unguarded moment, the gulf between their worlds narrowed, even as the rules remained in force. By the end of the night, when the last of the guests had departed and the penthouse was draped in a heavy, reflective silence, Isabella found herself both impressed and disturbed. James's presence had introduced an element of unpredictable humanity into her carefully ordered life. Lying awake in the quiet darkness of her bedroom, she couldn't shake the realization that perhaps her perfect world was not as impervious as she had once believed. The seeds of transformation had been sown, and neither could foresee just how deeply they would take root. In the weeks that followed, the collision of Isabella's meticulously orchestrated life with James's unrefined existence grew ever more pronounced. Each day presented a new clash of ideologies, a daily reminder that two worlds, however different, could not easily be reconciled. Isabella's days were structured in a series of meticulously planned events, every detail dictated by the rigorous standards of high society. In stark contrast, James's world was governed by spontaneity and unpretentious authenticity, where life was experienced in raw, unfiltered moments. At the many social events and exclusive gatherings hosted by Isabella, every interaction was like a performance in a grand theater. The elegant soirees were filled with precisely rehearsed conversations, delicate gestures, and an unspoken understanding that every word and movement was measured. Isabella, ever the consummate hostess, demanded perfection from herself and from everyone around her. Yet, amidst this backdrop of formality, James's presence proved to be a disruptive force. With his relaxed demeanor and straightforward manner of speaking, he frequently clashed with the rigid expectations of Isabella's world. One memorable evening at a lavish rooftop party underscored this tension. Isabella had orchestrated every detail, from the ambient lighting that bathed the terrace in soft hues to the gourmet delicacies meticulously arranged on silver platters. Guests mingled with practiced ease, each smile and nod part of an elaborate social script. However, James felt increasingly out of place. Opting to disregard the stringent dress code and decorum, he mingled in his own unpolished style, engaging in honest, unfiltered conversation. When he laughed heartily at a simple, unscripted joke or chose to dress casually, murmurs of disapproval rippled through the crowd. At one point, during a particularly tense exchange, Isabella attempted to rein him in, gently chiding him for his disregard of protocol. In response, James's eyes burned with quiet defiance as he stated, "You can't force me into your world and expect me to conform. I'm not a chess piece for you to move around." His words, delivered with calm conviction, sent a shockwave through the carefully choreographed atmosphere, leaving a trail of uncomfortable silence in their wake. For Isabella, the remark was a painful revelation, a stark challenge to the very foundations of her identity. It forced her to confront the possibility that her perfectly controlled universe might be as fragile as it was beautiful. In the days that followed, subtle acts of rebellion began to punctuate their daily interactions. James would prepare hearty, unrefined meals in her immaculate kitchen, opting for simplicity over the elaborate culinary rituals Isabella had come to expect. In social settings, his casual, sincere demeanor often clashed with the meticulously scripted conversations of her peers. Each small act of nonconformity chipped away at the polished facade Isabella had spent years constructing. As the tension between their divergent worlds mounted, both began to question the true cost of maintaining a life defined solely by control and perfection. Every defiant smile and every unsanctioned gesture became a reminder that authenticity, however unruly, was a force that could not be entirely tamed by rules and expectations. Inevitably, the relentless friction between Isabella's structured existence and James's spontaneous nature culminated in a surprising proposal, a challenge that would force her to confront the very heart of his world. One brisk morning, as the city stirred to life beneath a pale sunrise, James suggested that Isabella experience a day in his world, free from the polished veneer of high society. Though hesitant, the invitation struck a chord within her. The carefully maintained boundaries of her life were beginning to feel confining, and perhaps it was time to see beyond the gilded cage. Reluctantly, Isabella agreed to accompany James to the local homeless shelter where he volunteered. The journey itself was transformative. As they left behind the sleek, mirrored facades of downtown skyscrapers, and entered neighborhoods marked by time-worn brick and a palpable sense of resilience, Isabella felt as though she were crossing an invisible threshold into an entirely different realm. The shelter was a hub of raw, unfiltered humanity. The sound of overlapping voices, the clatter of utensils in a bustling communal kitchen, and the genuine smiles of those who found joy amid hardship created an atmosphere that was both chaotic and deeply real. Inside the shelter, Isabella was struck by the stark authenticity of it all. There were no pretense or rigid etiquettes here, only people united by shared struggles and small victories. She watched as James moved among the residents with ease and compassion, greeting everyone by name, offering a reassuring word or a comforting pat on the shoulder. In one touching moment, she observed him comforting a single mother who had weathered more storms than most could imagine. His gentle presence and genuine empathy spoke volumes of a life led not by ambition for wealth but by an unwavering commitment to humanity. For hours that day, Isabella immersed herself in the shelter's rhythms. She rolled up her sleeves, served warm meals, sorted through donated clothes, and listened to the heartfelt stories of the residents. With each act of service, the meticulously controlled image of the businesswoman began to dissolve, replaced by a raw vulnerability she had long suppressed. In the absence of judgment or expectation, she discovered a profound beauty in imperfection, a beauty defined by resilience, empathy, and the courage to embrace one's flaws. As dusk fell and they drove back to her penthouse, the silence between them was filled with unspoken understanding. Isabella's mind swirled with new insights about the true meaning of strength and connection. The rigid structures of her former life seemed suddenly less significant than the warmth and unpredictability of human interaction. That day had not only challenged her perceptions of wealth and control, but it had also ignited a spark of transformation, a realization that the trappings of her past were no longer enough to define her future. In the weeks that followed her eye-opening visit to the shelter, Isabella found herself increasingly haunted by reflections of her former self. The pristine, controlled image she had meticulously cultivated began to show subtle cracks under the pressure of genuine experience. Every interaction with James, every unscripted moment in the shelter, echoed in her mind, challenging the long-held belief that power and perfection were synonymous with happiness. One cool evening, after another glittering gala where she had dutifully played the role of the unassailable heiress, Isabella felt an irresistible pull toward the place that had ignited her transformation. Instead of returning to the isolation of her opulent penthouse, she ventured back to the homeless shelter alone. The drive was quiet and contemplative, a journey not just through the city, but into the depths of her own soul. When she stepped through the shelter's worn doors, she was greeted not by the adulation of high society, but by the warm, unpretentious smiles of those who saw her simply as another helping hand. Without the weight of wealth and status, Isabella rolled up her sleeves and joined the volunteers. She served meals with a newfound tenderness, sorted donations with genuine care, and listened intently to the residents' stories of struggle and hope. With every act of unadorned kindness, the carefully constructed walls of her persona began to crumble. Here, among people who lived raw, unfiltered lives, Isabella discovered that true strength was not measured by the number of accolades or the size of one's bank account, but by one's capacity to empathize and connect. James noticed the change almost immediately. The once impenetrable businesswoman, defined by an unwavering commitment to control, was gradually revealing a side that was vulnerable and real. In the soft glow of the shelter's modest lighting, when their eyes met over shared moments of quiet work, there was an unspoken acknowledgement of a metamorphosis taking place. The cold distance that had once separated them was steadily giving way to something far more human, a tentative openness, an invitation to be seen as more than just a symbol of power. As days turned into weeks, Isabella found solace in the authenticity of her new environment. Conversations with shelter residents became deeper, more personal, and every smile exchanged carried the weight of sincere gratitude. With each shared story and every laugh that broke the monotony of high society pretense, the facade she had so meticulously maintained began to unravel. Although the transformation was gradual and fraught with internal conflict, she realized that embracing imperfection was far more liberating than clinging to a hollow ideal of perfection. In the quiet hours of the night, Isabella lay awake pondering the bittersweet beauty of vulnerability and the realization that, perhaps, the truest strength lay in the courage to let go. As the weeks melted into one another, the tenuous connection between Isabella and James deepened in unexpected ways. What began as a challenge born of a wager evolved into a quiet, transformative bond, one built on shared moments, honest conversations, and a growing empathy that transcended the initial terms of their arrangement. Even as the shadow of the bet loomed over every interaction, the genuine warmth that had sprouted between them began to eclipse the original deception. In the stillness of late evenings, long after the clamor of high society events had faded into memory, Isabella and James found themselves alone in the spacious living room of her penthouse. The grandeur of the room, once a symbol of the unyielding barriers between their worlds, slowly transformed into a sanctuary for their private moments. They talked about the small joys of life, the taste of a simple meal, the comfort of a sincere smile, the subtle beauty of imperfections. Isabella, who had long equated success with calculated achievements, became increasingly captivated by James's unpretentious perspective. His stories of everyday struggles, told with humor and heart, painted a picture of life that was messy, unpredictable, and undeniably real. Yet, in the midst of this growing intimacy, the bet remained an unspoken specter. Isabella's heart ached with the awareness that every shared secret, every unguarded moment, was tainted by the knowledge of the wager that had brought them together. The challenge had been her initial motivation, and now it threatened to undermine the genuine connection they were cultivating. Late at night, as the soft glow of a bedside lamp illuminated their contemplative faces, James's gentle humor and steadfast presence chipped away at the barriers Isabella had erected over years of self-imposed isolation. In return, she began to reveal fragments of her true self, vulnerabilities and hopes long buried beneath the polished mask of the heiress. Their growing bond, however, was not without its moments of tension. The expectations of Isabella's high society world would occasionally clash with the unstructured authenticity of James's existence, sparking disagreements that were as painful as they were illuminating. Yet even in these conflicts, they discovered small truths about one another. Isabella marveled at James's unwavering commitment to his principles, while he found himself admiring her fierce intelligence and drive, qualities that, despite their origins in a world of privilege, held a beauty all their own. Every shared smile, every lingering glance, fortified a connection that was slowly eclipsing the original wager. As the moments of genuine closeness accumulated, both began to realize that what they shared was no longer about winning or losing a bet. It was about the transformative power of authentic human connection, a force so potent that it threatened to change everything they once believed. And even as the truth of the bet continued to cast a long shadow, the warmth between them promised a possibility of redemption, a second chance at a life defined not by control and calculation, but by vulnerability, understanding, and love. One evening, when the penthouse was draped in an unusually heavy silence, Isabella returned home to find James sitting alone on the couch. His eyes were fixed on the screen of his phone, and the tension in the room was nearly tangible. As she approached, James slowly lifted his gaze, revealing an intensity marked by hurt and disbelief. Clutched in his hand was his phone displaying an article, a meticulously crafted exposé, detailing every facet of the wager that had brought them together. The article laid bare the terms of the bet, the conditions of their marriage, and the cold calculation behind it all. "Tell me it isn't true," James demanded, his voice a tremor of anger and sorrow. The accusation hit Isabella like a tidal wave. For a long, agonizing moment, she stood paralyzed, the truth that she had long tried to bury now glaring back at her with undeniable force. The luxurious surroundings of her home, once symbols of her unassailable world, suddenly felt like a gilded cage imprisoning her secrets. James's eyes, filled with betrayal and raw vulnerability, silently pleaded for honesty. "I wasn't just a game to you, was I?" he asked, his voice thick with pain. In that excruciating silence, Isabella's carefully maintained facade crumbled. Her heart pounded as she struggled to articulate the inexpressible, a confession that no words could adequately mend. "I never intended to hurt you," she finally whispered, her voice breaking under the weight of regret. What began as a challenge, it morphed into something real. I started caring for you in ways I never imagined. Yet, even as she spoke, the damage was done. The truth, once hidden in the shadows of a wager, now threatened to unravel every genuine connection they had forged. James's face betrayed the conflict raging within him, a mix of anger, sorrow, and a tentative understanding. The revelation transformed the dynamics of their relationship, shattering the illusion of a simple transaction and exposing the raw, unfiltered pain beneath. In that charged moment, the bet was no longer a mere test of control. It had become the catalyst for a profound, painful reckoning. Both stood on the precipice of a future where nothing would ever be as it once was, the truth hanging heavy between them like a mournful dirge for lost innocence. In the aftermath of the shattering revelation, the delicate balance between Isabella and James teetered on the brink of collapse. The heavy silence that followed in the wake of their confrontation was laden with sorrow and unspoken remorse. For James, the betrayal cut too deep. The realization that their union had been built on a wager was a blow that he could no longer ignore. With a heart weighed down by hurt and disillusionment, he resolved that continuing in this arrangement was no longer an option. Without ceremony or further discussion, James began to pack his modest belongings, a stark, painful counterpoint to the lavish world he now reluctantly inhabited. Each folded shirt, every carefully stowed tool, resonated with finality as if marking the end of an era. His eyes, which had once held the promise of unyielding compassion, now brimmed with a quiet, resolute sadness. "I may not come from your world," he said softly, his voice steady despite the heartbreak, "but I refuse to be a pawn, a chess piece in a game where I was never meant to win." With those words, he stepped away from the only life that had, for a fleeting moment, offered him genuine connection. Isabella watched in silent agony as James's figure receded into the distance. In that moment, every carefully constructed illusion of control and perfection crumbled under the weight of truth. The vibrant tapestry of shared laughter, quiet conversations, and fleeting intimacy now lay in tatters, its fragments strewn about like broken dreams. For the first time, Isabella understood that winning the bet, a victory that had once seemed paramount, was utterly hollow if it meant losing the only person who had ever truly touched her heart. In the days that followed, the emptiness of her existence grew ever more acute. The grandeur of high society events, the relentless pace of business, and the pristine opulence of her penthouse all conspired to remind her of the void left behind. Alone in her silence, she was forced to confront the stark reality. The relentless pursuit of control had cost her the authenticity of human connection. And as night after night passed in a haze of regret and introspection, Isabella was left to ponder whether the price of ambition was too steep if it meant sacrificing the very essence of who she was. In the long, desolate days following James's departure, Isabella found herself adrift in a world that had lost its luster. The dazzling galas, the boardroom triumphs, and even the opulent trappings of her penthouse seemed empty and meaningless. The life she had so carefully constructed, built on the pillars of control and perfection, now appeared as a hollow shell echoing with the loss of genuine connection. Every social engagement was a reminder of the chasm that had opened within her, one that no amount of wealth or power could fill. Haunted by memories of tender moments shared with James and tormented by the bitter taste of regret, Isabella sought solace in the one place that had sparked her transformation, the homeless shelter. No longer did she step into that humble haven as a distant patron. Instead, she immersed herself in the daily rhythms of its existence. Here, amid the clamor of shared hardships and quiet acts of kindness, she found a refuge from the cold isolation of her former life. The residents, whose lives were marked by struggle yet illuminated by hope, greeted her not as an heiress but as a fellow soul in need of connection. As Isabella worked alongside the volunteers, serving meals, sorting donations, and listening intently to the heartfelt stories of the shelter's inhabitants, a profound realization began to take root within her. She discovered that true strength was not derived from the illusion of unyielding control, but from the willingness to embrace vulnerability, to admit one's own imperfections, and to find solace in shared humanity. In the midst of hardship, she found beauty, a beauty defined not by perfection but by resilience and compassion. Each day spent in that unadorned space chipped away at the carefully constructed facade of the business magnate she once was. Slowly, Isabella began to understand that the relentless pursuit of power had blinded her to the simple, transformative acts of kindness that gave life its true meaning. With every smile exchanged, Every tear shared over a modest meal, she rediscovered a part of herself long buried under layers of sophistication and control. The high society world she had once revered now seemed remote and trivial in comparison to the raw, unfiltered reality of the shelter. In the quiet aftermath of these revelations, Isabella resolved that the only path forward was to embrace honesty and humility. The transformation was painful, marked by moments of deep self-reflection and regret, but it was also liberating. In the gentle solidarity of the shelter, she finally faced the undeniable truth that the power of human connection far outweighed the cold currency of wealth and control. And as she set about rebuilding a life defined not by rigid perfection but by sincere compassion, Isabella discovered that redemption lay in accepting the unpredictable, messy, and beautiful nature of life itself. With a heart heavy from regret yet buoyed by a newfound clarity, Isabella resolved to confront her past mistakes and seek a chance to mend what had been broken. The journey of transformation had led her to understand that true strength was not measured by unassailable control, but by the capacity to love, to be vulnerable, and to admit one's errors. Determined to reclaim a part of the life she had lost, and perhaps salvage what remained of her connection with James, she set out to find him once more. Her search brought her back to the shelter, the very place where their disparate worlds had first converged in raw, unvarnished reality. Stepping through its familiar doors, Isabella was flooded with memories of shared laughter, quiet conversations, and moments of genuine understanding. In that humble sanctuary, stripped of pretense and entitlement, she found the courage to extend an olive branch to the man who had unwittingly challenged her every belief. There, amidst the bustling energy of the shelter, she spotted James quietly organizing supplies, a steady presence that had once filled her heart with hope. Approaching him with trepidation and sincerity, Isabella took a deep breath and spoke from the depths of her soul. "I was wrong," she admitted softly, her voice trembling with a mix of remorse and determination. "Not about the bet, but about what truly matters. I have come to see that the life I built on control and perfection is empty without genuine connection. I care about you, not as part of a challenge, but as the one person who made me question everything I once held dear." In that fragile moment, Isabella reached into her briefcase and produced a legal document, a deed transferring a significant property to the shelter. "This is for you," she explained, "a symbol of my promise to change, of my commitment to a life built on compassion rather than control." James's eyes widened in disbelief as he took in the gesture, a tangible admission that the wager, with all its painful consequences, had sparked a transformation in her heart. For several heartbeats, neither spoke. Then, with cautious resolve, James extended his hand. Their tentative embrace was charged with unspoken hope, a silent promise that maybe, just maybe, they could forge a new beginning built on honesty and mutual respect. In that embrace, amid the echoes of past hurt and the promise of a brighter future, both Isabella and James discovered that a second chance was not only possible but perhaps even inevitable. It was a chance to build a relationship defined not by a cold wager, but by the messy, unpredictable, and profoundly beautiful nature of real connection. Thank you for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment with your thoughts. What part of the story did you love the most? Would you take a bet like this? Let me know. Your support means everything, and I can't wait to bring you more amazing stories. See you in the next one.